All right. So we're going to, I hope it's Hosea part 29. So I guess I'm having trouble keeping up, but the last one said part 28, so I'm just going to assume that this is part 29. The last study we looked at verse 10 of chapter 9, and we saw Israel kind of, get a guilt trip. Said, man, you were going to do great things, but you've gone in the opposite direction of what you were supposed to do. And so now Hosea begins to lay it on pretty harsh onto Ephraim. And Ephraim, oddly enough, is the name that's given to the northern kingdom of Israel. And it's strange that they're given a name that means fruitfulness. And if we think about why Elohim allowed the split to start with, is that he told Jeroboam that if you will keep my instructions and follow my Torah, I'm going to give you the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. And the split was made, but Jeroboam went the exact opposite direction. So what was intended to be fruitful has ended up being something else. And we see that helical loop take place in that Yahusha came. A lot of wonderful things were to have happened with Yahusha. The restoration of the two kingdoms back together, the restoration of Yahuwah Elohim back to us as king, which is a very important concept we'll look at when we take a look at a verse from Judges. And that the opportunity for the Adam and Elohim to once again be reunited in that relationship. But what was, again, a beautiful gift, something that was meant to bring fruitfulness, we see the exact same thing happen within 100 years of the death of Yahusha. Things are starting to go exactly the same way that they went in the northern kingdom, where the rift begins to take place and they start to stray away from the Torah. And so there's no introduction to this. We're just going to go straight into the verses, but we're going to look at verses 11 through 14, I believe, through 13. So just a couple of verses here, but there's a lot of stuff in these, and breaking it down because there is so much stuff that if we try to do the balance of this little section of Hosea, we'd have a book up here and we'd be here for a while on a Tuesday night. So, but let's talk to our Elohim, and we'll take a look at whether the English really adds up to what the Hebrew says. Father, Yahuwah, our Elohim, thank you for everything that you do for us. Thank you that you've given us a path to walk. And we ask, Father, that tonight you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us, so that we can be receptive to the guidance of your Spirit. And we can look at ourselves and see if there's anything within this that we need to change. We thank you for it in the name of Yahusha. Amen. All right, so chapter 9, verse 11 says, As for Ephraim, their esteem shall fly away like a bird. There shall be no birth, and none with child, and no conception. So, we'll begin with the phrase, As for Ephraim, their esteem shall fly away like a bird. So we've considered in the past that Ephraim, as a name, means fruitfulness. It comes from the root pari, that means fruit. We could then consider that their fruitfulness will fly away like a bird. Now the word for fly away is ufef, or ofef, and the word for bird is off. Both of these words are rooted in uf, that aside from to fly, also illustrates being covered and being dark. So here we could formulate an idea that says fruitfulness being covered in darkness. The word for esteem is kavod, that means honor. The root is kavad, that means to honor oneself, among other things. There's a whole lot of stuff within this word. To honor oneself, to be dull, to be insensible, and to be unresponsive. And it's funny that when we read about Pharaoh hardening his own heart, this is oftentimes the word that was used, that he lifted himself up, he honored himself, and he became, what this tells us is that he became unresponsive to the word and the spirit of Elohim. He became dull and insensible to it. So if we add this into our idea, it gives us a concept of fruitfulness being covered in the darkness of self-aggrandizement. I spelt that right the first time, by the way. Causing dullness, insensibility, and unresponsiveness. So if we take a look at where Yisrael was, then they had separated themselves. They don't want to have anything to do with the southern kingdom. They don't want to have anything with that Torah, because it's the Torah of the southern kingdom. It's no longer viewed as the Torah of Yahuwah. So we're going to come up with our own system of worship based on our own beliefs, our own needs. So we kind of see in the helical swing of things how this has happened again very recently. So the house of Israel was referred to as Ephraim. They had exalted themselves, established their own manner of worship, and had become unresponsive to the instruction of the Torah of Yahuwah. Again, their excuse was, we don't want to have anything to do with the way the house of Yehuda worships. And around the time of Constantine, when it was banned to do anything related to the feasts, the festivals, or anything, the feasts and festivals of the Jews, or have anything to do with the law of the Jews, the Torah of the Jews, those were the words that were used to say that if you did, you'd be excommunicated from what was becoming the church. So we see this thing happening over again. They didn't want to have anything to do with the feasts and festivals of Yahuwah, but they only saw them as the feasts and festivals of the Jews. So we can see this occurring once again in today's modern religious systems. Wow, I'm getting ahead of myself often. Hosea's message is just as relevant today as it was when it was proclaimed to the northern kingdom. We are now to consider three aspects of what this darkness and unresponsiveness brings with it. It says, there shall be no birth, and none with child, and no conception. So we'll begin with the phrase, there shall be no birth. The word for this is milidah, that means from the birth. The word for birth is yalad, that means to bring forth and travail. It can refer to bringing forth of iniquity. It can also refer to bringing forth distress and bringing forth wickedness. Now, in the Hebrew of this verse, there is no word for there shall be no. So we've added something in here to say, well, there's not going to be anyone giving birth. There's going to be a barrenness. And if we look at this topically, we can see that it's the first time really in the history of the prophets that this type of curse or threat, whatever you want to call it, it's the first time that this type of threat is made, that's saying that it's going to be so bad that your women aren't even going to give birth. They're not even going to conceive. So it's the first time that this type of thing has been said as far as the prophets goes. But we have to look a little bit lower, because the Hebrew itself doesn't say anything about there shall be no. What it literally says is, I think I said it earlier, that there shall be, from the birth. So going back, there should be no words. The word milidah means from the birth, not there shall be no birth. It means from the birth. So it is from the birth of kevod, and not that there shall be no birth. So from the birth of kevod. We can formulate an idea that from the bringing forth of the darkness of self-aggrandizement causing dullness, insensibility, and responsiveness. So now we're starting to get a picture of what Hosea is actually telling the northern kingdom. They're saying, you have brought forth upon yourself a dullness that has basically blinded you and made you unresponsive to the word of Elohim. And your fruitfulness is based on this false idea. All right, so we move on. It's from the birth of Kodon, from the bringing forth of the darkness of self-aggrandizement, causing dullness, insensibility, and responsiveness. Now, there is no word for none with child at all in this verse. The word umebeten means and from the womb. The word for womb is beten, that aside from womb means belly, and as such it refers to the seat of mental faculties. So what we can now consider is fruitfulness being covered in the darkness of self-aggrandizement, causing dullness, insensibility, and unresponsiveness that's brought forth by and through the mental faculties. So here is the problem that both Yisrael had, and we can take it all the way to the problem with the church fathers and even with the rabbis and all of their stuff with halakha, that instead of being spiritually connected and understand that this is the word of Yahuwah Elohim, that our mental faculties take over and we say, well, we either don't want to pay attention to it, we want our own thing, and we're going to come up with our own dogma, or, well, basically that's it. We're going to come up with our own dogma. It's just the mental faculties take over. And this takes us all the way back to the garden, that there was a choice to eat from the tree of life, which is to eat from the Torah, to understand the word according to what Yahuwah Elohim had given, as opposed to eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that we begin to formulate our own ideas as being better than those of Yahuwah Elohim. Because what did the serpent say? You will be as Elohim, knowing good from evil. So we begin to make our own concepts, our own mental concepts, but the spiritual separation, that spiritual connection is lost. So, all right, so, let's see, where were we? Back down here. The house of Israel thought that their manner of worship was okay, but they did not consider the spiritual ramifications. This is a vital message. We must know and understand the Torah's point of view. It takes us back to understanding the two sides of Shin. There's our point of view, and there's Elohim's point of view. Yahusha said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. They're going to arrest me. They're going to beat me up. They're going to put me to death. And Peter says, dude, you're freaking out, wigging out, and stressing out. That's not going to happen to you. And Yahusha says, get behind me, Satan. You're looking at it from your point of view. You're not looking at it from Elohim's point of view. And what he's telling Peter is, turn your shin around. You're looking at things from the wrong side of the picture. We have our mental faculties, our carnal side that we look at things, but we also have the spiritual side that when we're connected, we see things through that spiritual connection with Yahuwah Elohim that allows us to see the greater scope, the bigger picture in things. And this happens to us all the time. And, I'll confess it happens to me quite often, that I see my point of view first before I actually stop and ask myself the question, do I believe that Yahuwah Elohim exists? Because do I only believe that Yahuwah Elohim exists when everything is a bed of roses? Do I believe that Yahuwah Elohim exists when things are getting very difficult? Or do I depend on myself? And this is where that difference between Elohim's point of view, my point of view, I fail to see the bigger picture in things. So, a very important lesson for us to understand. Yahuwah's point of view or our point of view, and not depend or rely on what we think is right according to our point of view. Yisrael did, as mentioned in the last verse of let's try that again. Yisrael did as is mentioned in the last book of Judges. That says, and that is Judges Shoftim 21:25. It says, in those days there was no sovereign in Yisrael. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There's no sovereign in Israel. Who was the sovereign of Israel during the time of the judges? Yahuwah Elohim was still the judge. Wasn't until a short time later with Samuel that they said, we want a physical one. What is this telling us? It's saying that they did not perceive that spiritual authority. So we did what was right in our own eyes. We came up with our own mental processes to interpret how we should behave according to what I think and not necessarily what the Torah says. So let's consider the last phrase, and no conception. Anybody want to take a gander as what word is not found in this? The word is umeherayon, that means from the conception, not and no conception. Okay? So this is telling us that these things are there, not that these things are not there. The word for conception is heron, that does mean conception, but comes from a root hara that means to conceive, contrive, and to devise. These are mental terms and not physical terms. So there's a difference in haran and hara, is that one is a physical type of an idea, but this other one is more of a spiritual type of an idea, or a mental type of an idea, that means to conceive, contrive, and to devise. Mental terms, not physical terms. To contrive means to do something foolish that brings about a bad situation. So what we can consider from this last phrase is that poor thinking will conceive and devise ideas that will foolishly lead to a bad situation. If we consider what their ideas were going to do to the northern kingdom, we say that captivity and being lost to time can be considered a bad situation. They were taken into captivity not once, but they were taken into captivity twice. First with Assyria and then with Babylon. And then they were dispersed. They decided they weren't going to come back because they had this ego trip that we're not going to have anything to do with the southern house of Yehuda. We're just going to stay with the Gentiles. And as a result, we have the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Sounds like an Indiana Jones movie. But so we consider that their situation, because of their choices, became a pretty serious situation. What we can consider from this last phrase is that poor thinking will conceive and devise ideas that will foolishly lead to a bad situation. Being separated from Yahuwah Elohim because of foolish behaviors is even worse than being taken into captivity or being dispersed amongst the nations. They literally were absorbed, and they absorbed the Gentile cultures. They absorbed their methods or their manners or their way of worship, and they literally separated themselves from Yahuwah Elohim. That by the time they came down after that final captivity in Babylon, that all was left was the poor, the uneducated, the unskilled, and they basically massed themselves around the region of Samaria, which was the southernmost tip of the northern kingdom that bordered on Yehuda, that they started to reassimilate into the worship of Jacob, and they began to worship on the mountain of Gerizim and take on these things, so that they became what was called the Samaritans. But if we consider that they were worshiping, and in Yochanan, we know the Samaritan woman says that we've worshipped on this mountain forever like our father Jacob did. That Yaakov means to supplant. So basically we're worshiping something that replaced something else. And we worship on the mount there where the blessings were given. So we worship in a way that supplanted true worship, and we expect blessings to come from it. That Yahushua responded to that, you worship what you don't know. So it's something to consider in all of that. So the overall concept that we can consider from this verse is fruitfulness, being covered in the darkness of self-aggrandizement, causes dullness, insensitivity, and unresponsiveness. It's brought forth by and through the mental faculties, and poor thinking will conceive and devise ideas that will foolishly lead to a bad situation. So this was a serious message to the house of Israel, and it should be an echo that we hear today and we should consider today. Hosea is telling them the way it is, saying, you're thinking this stuff up, you have separated yourself from the Torah, it's going to lead you into a very bad situation. You're too proud to come back to the worship of Yahuwah Elohim. You need to give it up, make teshuvah, and come back to the true worship. He's saying that you're not. And as a result, your fruitfulness is going to be a perceived fruitfulness that it's actually covered in darkness, and it's going to lead you into a very bad situation. So verse 12 illustrates the seriousness of this concept. And verse 12 says, yes, though they bring up their children, yet will I bereave them, that there be not a man left. Yes, woe unto them when I depart from them. So again, we see this continuance of this idea that I'm going to make you barren, you're not going to be able to conceive, and it's going to be so bad that there's not going to be any Adam left. It uses the word Adam in this, and it doesn't use the word Ish. That there's not going to be a human being left among you. And if we can consider what happened to the northern kingdom, we can almost consider that to be a truth, because they were completely absorbed in the diaspora. That even coming out, collecting the fragments, so to speak, that Paul went in to do, he was still struggling and having to bring back people that would not completely assimilate back into a Torah observant lifestyle. And this is why he had this meeting with Peter and Peter, James, and John in the Council of Jerusalem to say, what can we do? We can't throw the entire Torah at them. So they came up with this. I think it's kind of a stupid idea. Basically, we look at this, they had this great Jerusalem council, it was so great and all that in a bag of potato chips. But what did they decide? Well, we're not going to follow the Torah either. We're just going to put these 4 little things on them that, that they don't commit idolatry and they don't commit adultery and they worship Elohim, and I can't remember what the last one was. But what I'm saying was, none of it had, Eat strangled food. We have 4 of the 7 Noahide laws that are mentioned in the Talmud, that a righteous Gentile can, that if the righteous Gentile sticks to these 7 Noahide laws, they can be considered okay amongst the Yehudim. But anyway, so, but let's consider this verse a little more deeply. The verse begins with the word ki. That also means truthfully and assuredly. And for some reason, I don't know why, but the Hebrew of these verses ended up going left to right instead of right to left. So we're actually reading this Hebrew backwards. But it begins with the word ki that also means truthfully and assuredly. So what we're going to consider in this verse is the truth. The next word that's used for though is im, that can also be used as the word if. So this would alter the phrase to say, if they bring up their children. So here is a choice. If you bring up your children, you can bring up your children or you cannot bring up your children. The word for bring up is yegadule or yegadulu, that from the root gadol means to make something great or to be great. this word also means to magnify or to exalt oneself. In fact, this is the first time that we see the gimel as the root of a word in Torah is in the word gadol, when he made the great sea monsters, so to speak. So to magnify or to exalt oneself. The word for children is b'nai. We've talked about several times. It comes from bana, that means to establish and to restore. So the choice becomes one of who is exalted in one's becoming restored or established. Who are you honoring in your restoration and your being established? Am I honoring myself because I can do all things through me who strengthens me, and I don't need the Torah, and I don't live by that old law anymore, and I'm saved by grace, and I don't have to do anything, even though Yahusha says that it's more than simply faith and grace. You have to actually do something as well. So, who am I exalting? Or who am I depending on to restore and to establish me? Did Yisrael depend on and believe that it was Yahuwah Elohim that did so by and through his Torah? Or did they depend on their self-aggrandizement to restore and to establish them? Because they had gotten totally away from the spiritual concept of things. We are going to worship this way. This is what we think we need to do. We're going to make 2 golden calves. We're going to put one in Bethel. We're going to put one in Dan. We're going to have our own priest because all the Levites have left. And we're just going to do it our way. And the other choice, of course, would have said, we're going to go down and worship according to the Torah, go to Jerusalem, and let the Levites do it for us the way it should be done. But they had broken away from the southern kingdom of Yahuwah. They rejected the Torah because it was what the southern kingdom followed, and established their own form of worship, and did away with the name of Yahuwah, replacing it with Baal. That means Lord, means master. So again, we see a helical loop taking place, that it was the Yahudim, the rabbis, that felt they needed to put a hedge of protection around the name of Yahuwah. And they said, you cannot pronounce the name in public. And basically, when we read the Torah, we got away from using the name. And as a result, it trickled over into the Christian community. They stopped using the name. And as a result, we have, I was talking to some friends that moved to Arkansas, and they wrote me and they said, yeah, we found a Messianic group, but they won't use the name because they say the pronunciation has been lost. So the number one excuse. But there's only one way you can pronounce it in Paleo-Hebrew. You had like we said before, we have a yod and a hey in Paleo-Hebrew, even in the odiot, is only going to make one sound because there were no vowels. It's going to be Yah. The Vav in ancient Paleo-Hebrew was Ua. There was no V sound or Vav. It was Ua. And then the Hey at the end simply remains silent. So there's only one way that you can pronounce it according to the Paleo-Hebrew, the odiot, or the odiot. So we make up excuses for not using the name, and then we bring the Talmud into it that says, well, only the high priest can mention the name one time during the year in the Holy of Holies if he's during Yom Kippur, and that's the only time it can be mentioned. So anyway, we replaced it with Lord. Now we have the Lord God. So in Greco-Roman circles, we have to deify everything. So that's where we're at, is we have a deity now instead of Elohim. The ancient meaning of Elohim is a force. It's a power. It's something that exists, that makes everything exist. But we have a little gray or white bearded man that's floating around in some place called heaven on a throne, because that's what we understand. The same scenario would play out in both Judaism and Christianity, so we got ahead of ourselves. Note that this is done through the et. And if we look at the top, we see that what it's talking about, that yes, though they bring up through the Aleph and the Tav their children, it's a grammatical pointer in Hebrew, and basically it's a little tool that points to the object that's going to receive